Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified about our latest videos. Jason, you are speaking my language with this book. So first of all, thank you.
Yeah, I thought so.
Um, and our members are gonna love it. I think it's finally validating that, I know your last book, The Obesity Code, and which you sold millions and millions of copies, obviously validated that weight loss was so much more than calories in versus out. But I think really feel like this book is going to truly make our community, our members, people who are trying to lose weight in a healthy way actually feel validated and that
Yeah.
it's not just calories.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? I mean, this whole calories obsession has been a bit of a dead end because the idea is, of course, that you have this energy balance equation where you say body fat, which is really just calories stored, equals calories in minus calories out. So that's fine. That's true. That's always true. The calories in, people say, well, that's what you eat, right? Obviously. And so therefore, just control what you eat fewer calories. The problem is it doesn't actually work. And if you're to think about it for more than like 10 seconds, you'd realize why, right? So if the problem is that you're eating too much, whatever too much is, and that's of course very nebulous, but if you're eating too much, then you can't just say eat less because you don't understand why you're eating too much, right?
Mm.
So yeah, you have to ask the question, right? Why are you eating too much? And the answer is because you're hungry, right? So therefore the problem is not the calories. The problem is the hunger, right? It's simply as if you were to say alcoholism is simply alcohol in minus alcohol out. So therefore, if you're equally simplistic, you'd say just drink less alcohol. Hey, I just solved world alcoholism, everybody. It's like that's
Yeah.
so stupid because it's not that you're drinking too much alcohol. It's why you're drinking too much alcohol. Maybe you're addicted to alcohol. Okay, that's then you need to deal with the addiction. Now flip this over to the food. So body fat, calories stored equals calories in minus calorie out. Then you say just eat fewer calories, which is the just drink less alcohol sort of approach. And then it doesn't work in any way, shape, or form. You know, millions of people have struggled with their weight. It's not like they've never heard this just eat fewer calories,
Yeah.
right? Who hasn't heard it like a gajillion times, right? The problem is that it doesn't get into the deeper problem of why you're eating too many calories. So, say in this case, you have a food addiction. Well, just telling somebody to eat fewer calories when they have a food addiction is completely useless advice. And it's very insulting too, because it presumes that somebody has low willpower when really they have a food addiction. And the data on this is the research on this is sort of exploding on food addictions, on ultra processed foods, on really trying to understand the deeper reason why people are eating what they're eating, but also how much they're eating.
Okay. So let's back it up there for a second because food addiction, even by the Canadian Obesity Society, is not recognized as a true addiction. And so, are you talking addicted to food, meaning processed foods? Or are you talking about like an addiction and I just can't stop eating or I'm using food to cope or whatnot? Or they say, can you break that down for me?
Yeah, so food addiction is a really interesting topic because they have an addiction is essentially something that some people will continue to do even though they know that it is bad for them. So smoking is classic, alcohol is classic.
Yeah.
Not everybody who smokes becomes addicted, but some people who smoke do, and same with alcohol, right? Lots of people drink socially and are fine, but some people become addicted. So it doesn't have to affect 100% of people for a substance to be addictive. So just some people have to be affected. The thing is that if you think about foods, there people who will continue to eat foods that they know is bad for them, but feel that they cannot stop. And the answer is yes. And that's really all you need to say it's addictive. So you have people who are very overweight, who are type 2 diabetes, who have health problems, their knees are going, their back is going, and they will still eat Cheetos. They know it's bad for them,
Yeah.
like you need to tell them, but they can't stop themselves even though they know it's bad for them. And the data is very clear that it affects a very large number of people. And it's really particularly the processed food industry that we're talking about. Because people are like, oh, I'm addicted to food. Well, almost nobody is addicted to natural foods. Okay, so natural foods, beef, eggplant, whatever, stuff that looks like it came, from nature.
Yeah.
Almost nobody becomes addicted to it because when you eat them, you activate natural satiety mechanisms that tell you to stop. So I might love hamburgers, but I'm not going to eat 40 hamburgers
Right.
when I know it's really bad for me,
Yeah.
right? In fact, I probably couldn't, right? You see all those, remember all those restaurants that used to say, oh, eat this 80-ounce steak in an hour and we'll get it to you free. They're not giving away a lot of steak because it's a natural food. I love eggplant. I'm not addicted in any way to eggplant. Nobody is. But you say, I'm addicted to sugar. I'm addicted to soda. I'm addicted to, ice cream. I'm addicted to chips. You know, refined carbs like, pastas and breads. Lots of people say that.
Yes.
So the point is that it's not all foods. It's really in this ultra processed foods. And the reason is that the processing removes a lot of the factors that create satiety. So if you're eating foods that don't make you full, you can continue to eat them. And this is one of the things about calories that drives me bonkers, right? I don't know why, but people pretend that all calories are equally fattening. And it's obviously not true, right? They say a calorie is a calorie. Like, I know a calorie is a calorie, but are all calories equally fattening? Well, imagine that you drink 1,000 calories of, I don't know, Frappuccino. That's not that difficult, right? Compared to 1,000 calories of, say, you eat 2 hamburger patties or something like that, right? Which one makes you full? The hamburger patties clearly make you full. You're not going to want to eat a lot more after that. But the Frappuccino, which is, a huge amount of calories, has not created any satiety basically whatsoever. I could eat those 2 hamburger patties after I drank that Frappuccino. Easy. But I couldn't eat 2 more hamburger patties after I ate the first two. So even though if you eat the same calories, you've created different satiety and different hunger. So
Mm.
why would you pretend that these two things are equal in any way? They're not. They're completely different because they change your eating behavior in a completely different way. Just like if you ate a 2 egg omelet. So sometimes when, I eat a 2 egg omelet in the morning, and I don't normally eat breakfast, but when I do, I'm so full. I can't eat lunch, right? Because the eggs and the, meat and ham and all that stuff, it creates so much satiety. Whereas if I ate, 2 slices of white bread with jam, I would be hungry at 10:30, right? So the whole point is that it's not the calories. The calories is shallow sort of first order thinking. You have to get to the underlying hunger, of which there's actually three types, because everybody thinks hunger is one sort of thing. And nobody talks about hunger for some reason. But there's actually, when you classify it in a more scientific manner, it's actually homeostatic hunger, which is the typical hunger that you get, when your stomach is growling and so
Yeah.
on. There's hedonic hunger, which is the fact that people eat not because they're always hungry, but because it's enjoyable, right? So that's like dessert. Nobody eats dessert because they're hungry. You eat it for the pleasure of it.
Yeah.
That tips into sometimes ultra processed foods and food addictions. And then there's conditioned hunger, where you just simply get into this habit of eating and you eat whether you're there or not. And then it creates its own sort of anticipation and therefore hunger. And if you understand those types of hunger, you can see which one is the problem and try to deal with it. And that's going to be a lot more successful than simply trying to cut calories.
Well, you have in your book, there's a diagram that people think, okay, you eat more food or too much food, and it equates to weight gain, when in reality, yes, it's food, but it's also digestion, absorption, hormones, all of those things, which would make sense that when you are trying to lose weight, it also comes down to all of those things.
Yeah, and that's talking about homeostatic hunger, and the idea is that you don't eat or not eat based on calories, right? Have you ever thought to yourself, well, it's lunchtime, I should have 462 calories? Like, no, of course not, right?
Yeah.
But have you ever said, well, I'm really hungry, I'm going to get the extra large burrito, right? Of course, that's how people work. And what creates that hunger is the interplay of a whole host of different hormones. Hormones are what run our body. So there's things like the insulin, the cortisol, the GLP-1, GIP, sympathetic tone, baroreceptors in the stomach, the vagus nerve. So there's a whole host of these things which influence hunger and eating. How do we know that? Well, it's simple. If you think about insulin, for example, you give somebody insulin, they're going to gain weight. How? It creates hunger, right?
Right.
If you give somebody, if you increase their sympathetic tone, and there's different ways to do this, you will decrease hunger. So there were drugs that they've been taken off the market that were called anorexians. They killed hunger, basically. These drugs were this old weight loss drug called fen-phen, which
Yes.
got taken off the market. But it actually caused a huge amount of weight loss, on par with Ozempic and all those sort of things, right? And why did it cause weight loss? Because it made you full. Same thing with nicotine. Nicotine stimulates sympathetic tone and you get less hungry. So people who smoke are less hungry. They're not trying to control their calories in any way, but you've controlled their hunger. And that's what Ozempic teaches us. Ozempic does not limit your calories in any way. What it does is it kills your hunger, which reduces how many calories you eat. If you simply restrict the number of calories you eat, you can think about things like wiring your jaw shut. That actually was very popular about 50, 60 years ago. It didn't work. Bariatric surgery didn't really work. You could cut somebody's stomach, but you never took care of the hunger. So
Yeah.
therefore, they found a way to satisfy that hunger by getting around it. You had people who were bulimic, right? You'd eat and then you'd vomit, but you never took care of the hunger. So they still gained the weight back. So the whole point is that if you limit calories, but you don't control hunger, you're always going to lose. Always.
Yes.
Why? Because if you don't take care of the hunger, you simply eat less. Your hunger goes up. Now you want to eat more. Okay, well, now you're simply fighting with yourself day after day after day. And the hormones will win in the end because even if you don't eat, your body will ratchet down your metabolic rates so that you gain that weight. So it's all of those enzymes, it's all of those hormones. Like it's not just insulin, but like there's actually like 10 of them, right? Some of you can control, some you can't. Thyroid hormone, testosterone, estrogen, for example. So those are very fascinating because if you think about testosterone and estrogen and progesterone, these are the sex hormones.
Yes.
People always think weight gain is all about calories in, calories out. That's the stupidest thing ever, right? Because if you think about puberty, boys, as they go through puberty, they gain a lot of muscle compared to girls who tend to gain a lot of fat,
Yes.
right? They gain fat in their breasts, they gain fat in their hips. So boys and girls before puberty have roughly the same level of body fat. After puberty, girls have about 50% more fat. Is that willpower? No. Is that calories? No. Teenage boys eat a lot, right?
Mhm.
You
Yes.
can't believe how much they eat. Do
Yes.
they gain fat? No. In general, they gain a lot of muscle. Why? Because the testosterone was diverting all of those calories towards muscle gain. Same thing. You take somebody with prostate cancer, you take out their testicles, you castrate them chemically, actually, and their testosterone falls. They gain fat and lose muscle. Why? Because you affected their testosterone. Perimenopause is a period where the estrogen starts to go down, appetite starts to go up, and perimenopausal weight gain is huge. It happens all the time. Is it willpower? No. Is it calories in, calories out? No. It's the fact that you're undergoing menopause. Can you do something about it? Not necessarily. That's a little bit controversial, hormone replacement therapy, that kind of thing. But what we know is that as the estrogen goes down, the appetite goes up, people eat more, and then they gain more weight. So it's all a hormonal thing, right? So clearly, this whole calories thing is such a simplistic way of looking at things. It's this sort of first level, first order thinking. It's so shallow. That's why it doesn't work. Every single scientific study on cutting calories fails. Like it's been very consistent. It's been, it's like a perfect track record, right? Unblemished by success.
Why do you think people get so stuck on it? Because it just seems even the younger generation, they're just doubling down on it. Like, why?
Yeah,
Why?
it's because it's easy to understand. It's completely wrong, but it's easy to understand. And I'll give you an example, which I talk about in the Hunger Code, which is the three whys, right? So there's a concept in logic called the three whys. That is, if you really want to understand sort of the root cause, you got to ask the question why 3 times. So, for example, you could say to a child, you need to go to school. They'll say, why? And you might say to learn stuff, right? Lots of parents say that, to learn stuff. And they're like, why would I need to know, the capital of Uganda? It's like, okay, clearly you don't really need to
Yeah.
know the capital of Uganda. You could look it up, right? But you can't satisfy that until you ask the question 3 times. So you ask the question, to learn stuff. Why do I need to learn stuff, right? Well, because then you're going to get a better job. Why do I need a better job? Well, you're going to make more money. Okay, now that you've answered the third why, you can go back and say, you need to go to school now so that you can make more money later.
Yeah.
Aha,
Mhm.
makes sense. Everybody's happy. Your kid, might actually go to school. Or you might say, why did the Titanic sink? Right? And the wrong answer is because it hit an iceberg. That's shallow first order thinking. If you were to stop thinking at that shallow level and say, okay, the Titanic hit an iceberg. The solution to all future things is to not hit icebergs. Don't hit icebergs. So, is that good advice? Don't hit icebergs? No, not really. It's stupid, right?
Yeah.
So then you have to answer the why 3 times, right? The three whys. So why did it sink? It hit an iceberg. Why did it hit an iceberg? Well, the captain couldn't avoid it. Why couldn't the captain avoid it? Because it was going too fast. So now you can say, oh, the key to solving the problem is not to say to people, don't hit icebergs. The key is to say, slow down when the weather is bad or when visibility is bad. That's a much better way to do things. And it's the same as the calories, right? You say body fat equals calories in, calories out. So how do you lose weight? Eat fewer calories. That's first order thinking. You never went to the second step and said, why are you eating too much? And the answer is because you're hungry. Then you say, why are you hungry? And now you say, there's 3 types of hunger. There's homeostatic hunger, there's hedonic hunger, and conditioned hunger, all of which have different causes and different solutions. So I don't know if you ever read the book Hunger by Roxane Gay, but it's a terrific book.
Yeah.
She talks about she's a great writer, but she's very overweight, and she talks about it in her book. And she said that she thinks it's because she was sexually abused as a child, and it creates safety for her. So again, if you understand the why, right? If you understand that it's creating a sense of physical safety for her, then you wouldn't be so stupid as to say, just eat fewer calories,
Yeah.
because you have not taken care of the problem. And maybe it requires counseling, maybe it requires something else, maybe it can never be fixed. I don't know. But I know that telling her to eat fewer calories is absolutely not going to help. And guess what? It has never helped her, right? It doesn't help anybody because it's the don't hit icebergs advice. It's the one that's super obvious. And if you don't think about it too hard, seems to be correct, but is actually completely sort of useless.
So I just want to break down what you're talking about. So you're talking physical hunger, emotional hunger,
And
and
social.
hunger that comes with like social.
Yeah.
pressures and
So
whatnot.
there's actually so the physical hunger. There's actually a whole the whole first part is actually quite interesting because once again, it's the key is the hormones, right? So something like GLP-1, you're fixing you're attacking the hormonal part of it with Ozempic, for example, with GLP-1s. Therefore, you're reducing the homeostatic hunger, and therefore you're eating less. And the thing is that it's not just the calories you eat that affect the hormones, right? And I think, sorry, this is coming back to that first question about the diagram.
Yeah.
So it's not simply the calories. Like if you think about the way calories translates and foods translates to weight gain, it's not like calories and then weight gain. There's the foods that you eat, which differ on the amount of calories, the macronutrients, which is carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. But then there's all different ways that it's digested. And the way you digest a food plays a huge role in how quickly it's absorbed, which plays a huge role in what hormones are affected. So you could take two foods. You could take instant oatmeal, and they've done this study, instant oatmeal, and compare it to steel cut oatmeal. And you give two people equal calorie portions of the two foods. And what you see is that the way that it's processed, the instant oatmeal is ground up into a very, very fine dust. So it's absorbed. So you can cook it quickly. But the problem is because it's so finely ground, it gets absorbed extremely quickly into the body to spike insulin, and therefore you have a much higher insulin effect for the same food compared to steel cut oats, which are not ground so fine. So because the digestion is much slower, it gets held in the stomach longer. It's not absorbed as quickly because it's not ground down so fine. The insulin spikes are much lower, which leads to less weight gain. Well, people will eat less afterwards. They'll feel more full and eat less afterwards. So again, two foods, identical carbohydrates, identical calories, differing only by the way they're processed, affects digestion, which affects absorption, which affects the hormones, which affects your weight gain, right? So there's all these steps, and we know there's all these steps, but somehow we've spent like 50 years sort of deciphering how food is digested in our body. Then we throw all that knowledge out and say it's all calories, right?
Yeah.
Like, why? Why would you do that? And there's so many interesting effects, like the way you grind the food. So, stone ground flour versus machine ground flour, there's a big difference, right? The food, the order of the foods that you eat. So, if you eat the carbohydrates first or eat the carbohydrates last, huge difference to insulin. If you eat carbs by themselves, what I call naked carbs, makes a huge difference to the insulin effect. If you eat vinegar or lemon juice with your carbohydrates, makes a huge difference. If you blend seeded fruit like strawberries, actually quite protective, lowers the insulin effect. So it's actually quite good, which people do in smoothies and so on. So there's all these different ways that you can affect both digestion as well as absorption to change the food. You can take the same food and just switch them. For example, there was a study where they took meat and vegetables and carbohydrates. So they gave one group sort of the carbs first, waited 10 minutes, then gave them the meat and veggies, and then also switched them and sort of almost doubled the effect of the insulin, which is going to double effect. Remember, insulin's a hormone. It tells your body to store body fat. So you're getting twice as much signal to store body fat simply because you ate the carbs first compared to ate the carbs last, right? Then you say, okay, well, think about it this way. What if you have bread at the beginning of the meal? Well, that's not very good for you because you're eating all these carbohydrates right up front. You're doing it on an empty stomach, which means that as soon as it gets ground up, it's spit out, and you've got this, bolus of carbohydrates, which is just spiking your insulin like crazy. As opposed to if you ate the steak first and then you had the bread maybe after or with. In the stomach, your steak and the bread is all going to be mixed up. So as it goes through, you're going to have a bit of carbs, a bit of protein, a bit of fat, not all pure 100% carbs coming through your colon for absorption, right?
Mm.
So by understanding the actual process of digestion, I'm always like, why won't people like just think about this from a physiologic standpoint? You don't go from food to fat cells. It goes through your stomach, then it goes through your colon, then it has to be absorbed into the bloodstream, then it has to turn that into hormones, which tells your body to store or not store body fat, right? That's understanding the whole process of physiology from front to bottom. And if you know more about it, you can do more about it, because you can alter any of these things along the way.
It's just why don't we know? What I'm not tooting my own horn here, but you and I say the same things, obviously not on a level that you break them down scientifically in your expertise. But is it that the people talking about foods, dietitians, and I don't mean any disrespect, are being taught just stuff that it's really old? Why is everybody not saying what you're saying, Jason? Like,
It's, I think, because most of obesity medicine is dominated by these people who think it's all about calories.
yeah,
I mean, I know you teach people a certain way to eat, and the way you teach them to eat is very good because it keeps them full.
yeah,
That's the whole key.
yeah.
Like, it's not the calories, it's the
Mhm.
hunger, because your body doesn't count calories. Your body sort of counts hunger. Are you hungry or not hungry? That's what will determine if you go out and eat. You've created a community. So, in the last part of the book, I talk about the social aspects, right? And having a
Yeah,
community that supports you is probably, I think, actually the single most important thing for weight loss and weight gain. It's actually incredibly important. There's a study in the New England Journal of Medicine which showed that if your friend becomes obese, your own risk of weight gain goes up by like 171%. Like, it's incredibly important to have the right people around you, right? And that's why it works, because you're creating a community where you're eating a certain way, you're creating satiety, you're dealing with the hunger, not simply with the calories. Like, yes, if you're less hungry, you will eat fewer calories. So some people will say, well, see, it's all about the calories. That's just like the people who say, see, it's all alcohol in, alcohol out.
yeah,
It's just so stupid, because you're not dealing with the root cause. You're dealing with the sort of most obvious thing. Sort of like, see, don't hit icebergs. I told you.
yeah,
It's all about the iceberg. It's like, no, it's about slowing down, right? And this is the thing: create that community, eat the foods that are unprocessed and natural, right? And deal with the homeostatic hunger, which is what you do in your program, which is why a lot of people have found success where they haven't with other programs, because it attacks the hunger at all of these levels: the knowledge, the emotional side, the physical side, the emotional side, and the social side, right? So you have these three important things. And I always think about the social part is the part that we never talk about.
yeah.
It's crazy, because if you look at weight gain, it's obvious that where you live plays a huge role. If you took a Japanese person and plunked them into San Francisco, their risk of obesity goes up like, you know, 300, 400% within a generation, right? It's the same Japanese person. You stick them back in Japan and their risk goes way down. Why? Because there's something called social modeling, which is the range of behaviors that is sort of acceptable. And so if you're surrounded in a community where you're not eating on the street and you're not snacking all the time, well, that's going to help you, right? If you're in a situation like in the United States where everything is ultra processed, right? 70% of their diet is ultra processed. Well, that rubs off on you. If you're in a situation where people eat anywhere they feel like, okay? You eat in the car, you eat in front of your desk, you eat in front of the TV, you eat, while standing up. My wife the other day was in the elevator at work, and somebody was eating their salad in the elevator.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, like, you need to, like, take it easy, buddy. Like, it's not like taking a French fry here and there. It's like you had the fork out and the whole salad in the elevator. It's like, come on. So if you're in a situation where it is socially acceptable to eat all these different types of food, and eat them whenever you want and wherever you want, well, you're not going to succeed. And I always think that it comes down to sort of, the structure that you give a plan, right?
Mm.
So you think about, if you were to do a marathon, right? Say I wanted to do a marathon, I'd get a running coach, and the running coach would say, week 1, do this, week 2, do this, do this, do this, do this, week 4, you're going to do this, week 8, and then, right, you're going to have a plan. It's going to tell you what you're doing, when you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're going to do it, right? Sprints or hills or whatever, right? Fine. That's a good plan. It has the who, what, when, where, and how, right? As opposed to somebody who says, just run, a little bit, run a couple hours a day, whenever you feel like, right? And then at the end, just run, right? So obviously, a structured plan is going to be so much more successful. So if you think about this whole eat fewer calories plan, does it tell you what to eat? Hell no. It doesn't tell you nothing.
Mm.
Does it tell you why you're eating? No. Does it tell you when you should be eating?
No.
Does it tell you why you should be eating? Does it tell you how you're supposed to be eating it? Like, carbs first, carbs last, don't eat too late, like all these things. No, it has nothing for you. It's a completely unstructured plan. You're basically left hanging out by yourself, right? Trying to do your own thing and count your calories, as opposed to what should you eat? Hey, eat unprocessed foods, eat natural foods, avoid ultra processed foods. When should you eat? Eat earlier in the day. Eat, breakfast, lunch, dinner, or maybe some snacks. But when should you eat? At least it's structured. Where should you eat? You should only eat at a table where you're supposed to be eating. You're not supposed to be eating while distracted. You're not supposed to be eating, whatever. How are you supposed to eat? Eat slowly, eat mindfully, right? So if you have a plan that captures all of the questions of how you're going to change your behavior, you're going to be like 10 times more successful. And guess what? That's probably exactly what you see in your groups.
Yeah, and this is why it comes back to what I said. I think this book is gonna be, I mean, everybody who is doing my program needs to read this book. It's gonna be so validating to them that it's not just lack of willpower or that they weren't counting and weighing their measuring their food correctly, that it's so much more complicated than that. I love, so at the end of the book, if you're listening, and I know you're listening, Jason has these 50 tips. So you actually give actionable things. This is not a diet book per se, but you give a lot of tips on how to address and work through all these things. And I love your number 1 is don't count calories, and your number 50, the bookend, is find a weight loss buddy or join a weight loss group. Like I just think it's about time we're talking about this.
Right? I
Yeah.
mean, I can't believe that nobody talks about this stuff. Like, and this is what's hard, right? This is what's hard is that people get this advice, just count your calories. And when you fail, because they gave you a horrible plan that actually had no sort of human physiology behind it, right?
Mm.
Nothing about hunger, nothing about hedonic hunger, homeostatic hunger, hormones. What about perimenopausal weight gain? What about this? What about that? Nothing, nothing. You're left on your own to count your calories. And when you fail, they turn around and they point to you and say, you failed because you didn't want it enough. You didn't do it right. So
Right.
what they've done is they've given terrible advice and then blamed the victim, right? Nobody wants to be overweight,
No.
but the advice was simply no good. And when anybody questions the advice, they're all like, it's scientific. It's calories in, calories out. It's the first law of thermodynamics, right? And it's like nobody's breaking any laws of thermodynamics, buddy. Like nothing is being broken. I was talking to this one of the coaches at the fasting method, and she had this great line. She goes, "Hunger is a liar," and I was like, "What do you mean?" It's like because think about it this way: you're hungry, which means you think that you need more calories. But on your body, you're storing like hundreds of thousands of calories. So basically, you need to figure out how you're going to deal with the hunger because the hunger is a liar. You need to deal with the homeostatic hunger, the physical, the emotional, the social hunger, right? The hedonic and the conditioned hunger that we talk about in the hunger code. And the odd part about it is that I've read so many sort of diet books, nutrition books. Like, first of all, 90% of them start going on about calories in, calories out, right? It's insane. But nobody talks about the hunger. It's like, why not? Like, isn't that the most obvious thing? If you are not hungry, any of us can lose weight. That's what Ozempic tells us. Get rid
Yes.
of the hunger. Virtually everybody can lose a good amount of weight. Why not? Right? If I was not hungry, I'd switch all of my French fries to salad. I would never eat, the processed foods. I'd eat natural foods. I'd eat salad. Why don't I? Because the different reasons, but say hedonic hunger, right? Certain foods are engineered to give us pleasure. And sometimes you indulge in those foods. It's not like I never eat cookies, right? It gives me, like everybody else, pleasure to eat cookies. That's why we do it. You just can't do it all the time, right? But you have to acknowledge. So being mindful says, okay, well, I acknowledge that I'm not hungry physically, but I'm going to eat this cookie because I'm out celebrating. I'm going to eat this wedding cake. I'm going to eat whatever this is. And I know it's because I just want to, right? And as long as you know, as long as you control that, that's fine. But you know why you're eating. Not just this, oh, I'm going to weigh this piece of cake and then not eat salad because now I've made up my calories, right?
Yeah.
I saw once in a book written by a doctor who said, oh, you could eat ice cream for dinner. It's like,
Yes.
that's the stupidest advice ever. But
Yeah.
that's the advice that flows from calorie counting. You could eat 1,000 calories of Frappuccino and don't eat that hamburger or don't eat that, salad with a grilled salmon. That's the worst advice ever.
Do you
And
think
then they
it's
say,
just sorry, sorry, what were you
sorry,
gonna say?
and then they say it's all because of the nutrients. It's not the nutrients. It's because some foods make you full and some foods don't make you full. If you eat foods that make you full, guess what? You're going to stop eating.
Yeah.
If you eat foods that don't make you full, the Frappuccino, you're going to keep eating. And if you keep eating the cookies and the Frappuccinos and the ice cream, you're still not going to get full. So, how many calories you ate depended on the foods that you ate.
Do you think it's all because people are just so short-sighted and looking at weight loss and not actually looking at maintaining and sustaining the weight? It's all just like lose the weight, which isn't really the problem. It's what you can do arguably through eating less and exercising more, but it's weight loss I don't know is the problem. It's the being able to actually maintain and sustain it.
Oh, absolutely, because anybody can lose weight in the short term.
Yeah.
The problem is maintenance, right?
Right.
And this is the thing. You can, white knuckle your calories down, your hunger will go up. Now you've set up a tension between the calories and the hunger, right? So hunger went up, calories went down. You're fighting yourself all the time. What you want to do is reduce the hunger and reduce the calories, which is what Ozempic does, right? And you can eat more protein. You can eat unprocessed foods, right? And you will do exactly that. You will lower your hunger, which means you will lower your calories, right? And that's what's going to maintain your weight loss. But in all these short term studies and all these things, you get the situation where you're supposed to lower your hunger, lower your calories, but you increase your hunger because you never took care of the hormone part of things. That's what the weight loss drugs take care of. That's what a lot of these food rules take care of, right? Eat more proteins, eat more fats, eat less processed foods, switch up what you do, walk after dinner. There's a whole number of tips, and then 3 sort of golden rules that I consider the most important rules because they hit across sort of multiple levels of hunger, right? So avoiding ultra processed foods is probably is the number one sort of golden rule, because if you're eating these ultra processed foods, and remember, when food companies process foods, they do so for one reason: to sell more food, right? That's their number one reason. They want to sell more. They sell more, they make more money. So ka-ching. So the problem is that how do you sell more food? Well, you have to sell more food by making it less satiating, right? So if you ate one Cheeto and you were so full that you couldn't eat anymore, they would never sell Cheetos. Why?
Yeah.
Because you're going to stop after one. You're going to be, whoa, I'm so full, right?
Yeah.
So what they do is and I talk in the book about the many, many, many different ways that they change it so that there's almost no satiety, right? So you can make it very light. There's something called vanishing caloric density, which is very interesting. They add additives and flavors and other things. But the way you sell more food is to process it so it doesn't create satiety. Well, that's a problem for you who's trying to lose weight because you're eating a food and not creating any satiety, right? That's exactly what you don't want to do. So avoiding ultra processed foods is one, because you get not only the homeostatic hunger, the physical hunger, because you're not satisfying it, you're getting the hedonic hunger, because remember, a lot of these stimulate the reward pathways, right? Lots of sugar, lots of insulin spikes. So you feel good. You eat those Cheetos and you feel good, right? It tastes good. It feels good. So you get the hedonic hunger, and then you got the conditioned hunger where you just keep eating them, right? You're mindless. You're in front of the TV, just keep eating. And then what? Guess what? Guess what you see on TV? Ads for all this food, right? So they've created a situation where they're attacking all the different levels of hunger,
Mhm.
making you eat it while your doctor is like, count your calories. Like, you haven't talked about anything. None of the who, what, when, where, why, none of the ultra processing, none of the hunger. Instead, they rely on this ultra simplistic, ultra, shallow thinking of calories. And why? Because that's what they've always talked about. And anybody who challenges them, they just call it quack. Right? They're like, no, it's all calories in, calories out. It's all alcohol in, alcohol out. It's all iceberg in, iceberg out, right? How can you deny it? It's like, you know, they consider it
Science.
inevitable.
It's science. They say it's science. It's
They
science.
say
That's why.
it's science. It's the least scientific thing I've ever heard of. It's like insane. Like, it just boggles my mind sometimes.
Do you think that's why weight loss is so hard for people? It's just the misinformation and the approach?
I think it's mostly, yeah, yeah. I mean, misinformation is a difficult term because that's what the sort of authorities usually try and slander people with. They say,
Mm.
oh, well, it's misinformation, which assumes that they know the actual correct information, which
Right.
they don't, right? So what happens is that their own position is threatened by anybody who says it's much deeper than calories. I'm not saying that calories is irrelevant. It's one of, like, in that graph I have in the book, right? There's like the calories and the macronutrients, but then there's 10 factors in digestion, there's 10 factors in absorption, there's 10 factors in terms of hormones. So out of these 34 factors, one is calories. They're saying that 100% is calories. I'm saying it's one of all of these different factors that goes into how much weight you gain or lose. And in the end, it's not about calories, because if you're just thinking about your diet to lose weight,
Yeah.
you've already lost. It's your eating behavior that needs to change. And that includes things like, the group that you surround yourself with, the habits, the mindsets. The mindsets actually fantastically important. It's actually critical, and nobody talks about it, right? Like, we shouldn't be talking so much about the food on our plate as to how to think about that, right? It's not what you're eating, it's how you're thinking about it. That's the important thing, because if you start seeing ultra processed foods and decide and develop the mindset that you're not going to eat these ultra processed foods, you're going to be like 10 times more successful, because you're going to avoid those ultra processed foods. So the foods that you do eat are going to create satiety, fullness. You're going to diminish your hunger, which is going to be a lot easier, because and then yes, that is going to lead perhaps to calories, eating fewer calories or eating less calories than you burn, which causes weight loss, right? But that's the end result, right? Everybody looks at
Yeah.
the end result and thinks that's the beginning, right? That's not the beginning, that's the end, right? It's sort of like, same thing as money in minus money out, right? It's all money in minus money out, so education doesn't matter. No, the education allows you to learn more, to get a good job, which allows you to make more money, right? So education can be important, right? Or working hard. People might say, well, working hard's irrelevant, it's all money in minus money out, right? No, working hard gives you skills, like if you're a baseball player, which allows you to make the major leagues, which makes you make a lot of money, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
somebody might say, no, it's money in minus money out. Hard work doesn't matter. It's like, of course it matters, you moron. Of
Yes.
course it matters. Same thing with calories. At the very end, you get calories in, less than calories out. But how did you get there? Well, it's the mindsets, it's the food addiction, it's your habits, it's the foods that you ate, it's the satiety you created, it's the hormonal systems that you put into balance. Those are what cause the calories part that causes the weight loss, right? Everybody looks at that last piece and says, just count your calories, just eat fewer calories. That's just like, just drink less alcohol.
Yeah, so many you give us so many actionable tips and information in the book. Where do you stand on, sleep and stress, where they factor in?
Oh, extremely important. It's like sleep is one of these things that affects all kinds of things, but you can definitely see an increase in hunger. So you'd look at night workers, shift workers, for example. They all gain weight. It's well known, and part of it is because when you're off, working when you should be sleeping, kind of thing, you got this huge increase in ghrelin, which is hunger hormone, which means you're going to be hungry, which means you're going to eat, right? And again, if you just say, well, just don't eat, it's like, well, now you're dealing with the end product. What caused the problem in the first place was that you got the shift work, right? You're working when you should be sleeping. Your body is wired to sleep and you're working. Then that creates a lot of stress, which causes a lot of weight gain. Again, a lot of people get stressed and they eat more, right? And then it's like somebody will say, well, you should just eat less. No, the problem was the stress, right? It's like,
Yes.
come on, like let's be logical about this, right? It's not that they wanted to eat more, it's because they were under stress, or it was because they were lacking sleep. So sleep is incredibly important, stress is incredibly important. But because it doesn't fit neatly into one of these categories of calories, like stress has no calories, sleep has no calories, but it affects your eating behavior, which is going to affect your hormonal systems, which will affect your calories in, calories out balance, which causes or doesn't cause the weight gain and weight loss. Like, I think that the problem is so many people have been sort of brainwashed with this whole idea of this just calories, just eat less, just
Yes.
exercise more.
Mhm.
For years, for decades, people have built their careers on this kind of stuff, right? They've written hundreds of papers, so they consider themselves the smartest people in the room. But what they don't realize is that nobody who follows their advice actually loses weight,
Yeah.
right? Whereas, people who read my books, a lot of them come up, they've lost weight. People who follow you, they lose weight.
Yeah.
They've never been able to lose weight before. Why? Because you actually dealt with all of these issues of the hunger, of the stress, of the processing of the food, of the who, what, when, where, why, of how to eat, about eating behavior, as opposed to somebody who's just count your calories. It's inevitable. It's like it's not inevitable. Nobody has been ever able to show that counting calories causes weight loss.
No, you wrote this book, The Hunger Code. Was it, obviously it comes after the Obesity Code and the two are connected. You sold millions of those books. Is it that you needed a part two? Was it what you were seeing talking to your own patients? Was it where the diet industry is at with Ozempic? Like what was it that you were like, okay, I need to write this book right now?
Yeah, I think that it was a lot of the new research in the last 10 years has really clarified what it was. So the obesity code really takes us away from calories into hormones.
Mm,
But a lot of the data in the last 10 years, a lot of the new studies, and this is between the weight loss drugs, between the all this data, which is relatively new on ultra processed foods and food addictions, all that's relatively new. And it was really, so I see this as sort of the obesity code part two sort of thing. To take this we took you away from the calories, went into the hormones, but now let's get into the whole area of not just homeostatic hunger, physical hunger, which includes like not just like insulin cortisol, which we talked about in the obesity code, but the GLP-1s, the GIP, the
yeah.
sympathetic tone. the baroreceptors, the stress, the ghrelin, the leptin, all of those hormonal systems, the whole part about digestion and absorption, which I actually think is completely fascinating. Like how you can take the same food and change the way you absorb it and have so much different effect. And then to look back and say, hey, people actually have known about this a long time. People, when they eat bread, they'll dip it in olive oil and vinegar. Well, guess what? The vinegar actually slows down the absorption of the carbohydrate. It's like,
Yeah.
whoa, that's fascinating. Or eating early, or making sure you're not, because when you eat early, when you eat too late, you get a huge insulin effect, right? So even cultures that eat late, it's a very small meal, right? So in Spain, for example, they'll eat at like 10:30, but it's tiny. It's not this big North American style dinner. They have that at lunchtime. And
Yeah.
guess what? They do a lot better, right? So it was that there's all this new data, not only on the physical side of hunger, but on the emotional side, there's been huge research into the ultra processed food and food addiction, which I think is fascinating. And then, the conditioned hunger, there's been a lot more, as I mentioned, the data on social networks, because it turns out that social networks are probably one of the most important things in human behavior. We know this because social media is basically takes over the lives of everybody, and especially our children, right? So the sort of primary importance of social networks as to how it applies to weight, eating behavior, and obesity. Turns out it's incredibly important. Does anybody ever talk about it? No, not that I've ever heard. Like I go around and I read these books and I always think, oh God, somebody else who's talking about calories in, calories out. Like, come on, like you could have written this 50 years ago, right? Why
Yeah.
is nobody talking about these other problems that I think are relatively obvious? I don't know. And then that's where I was like, okay, maybe I should write about it so that I can tell people about it, because the more you know, the better you do, right? If you know about ultra processed food, then you can try to avoid it. Or even if you eat it, like you can take steps to say, well, I know it's ultra processed, I shouldn't eat too much of it, right? It's always interesting to me to compare the United States, and that's where a lot of good data is, with its 70% ultra processed food, to Italy. Because, Italians are very
Yeah.
famously love pasta, right? They love eating, they love getting together and eating, but their rates of obesity are so much lower. They're like a third of the North Americans. Why? Well, one of the things is that if you look at how they eat, it's incredibly different. Where Americans are eating in the elevator, Italians are eating with a whole group of friends,
Yeah.
family. They're enjoying themselves. They're eating natural food. So they'll have like the sardines and they'll have this and they'll have that. And their portions are tiny. But because they're laughing and talking and they're drinking wine, they're drinking alcohol. That's not great for you. But they're laughing, they're doing everything is sort of taken all together. Like it's not one thing like calories. It's like 34 things, right? All those things I talk about. They're mixing their meals. They're not eating naked carbs. They're walking after dinner. They're eating earlier rather than later, right? All of those things together create this level of obesity that is so much lower. And the American will think, oh, it's all about calories, not understanding that no, it's not all about calories. It's about all of these other things that has changed that Italian's eating behavior so that there's virtually no obesity compared to the United States. Then you take that American, stick him into the United States, and Italian Americans have the same level of obesity as everybody else,
Yeah.
right? It's terrible what's happened, and nobody ever thinks twice. They just go, oh, it's calories. It's like, no, it's a lot more than that. Like we need to think broader.
I know, I get to deal with members in my program. I talk to them all the time. You get to deal with your patients every day. Like they want to know this information. Yeah. It's not like they don't want to know it.
Yeah. Yeah. And nobody talks about it. So then everybody thinks that, hey, this is not the most important thing. Like these experts, these super experts out there, they're all going on about calories, calories, calories. So it must be calories. Like,
Yeah.
no, I don't think they actually know what they're really doing. So then they get to situation where they consider everything else just sort of quackery, right? It's
Yeah.
like, don't eat so much ultra processed foods. And there's lots of people who are like, wow, that's nothing. It's just the calories in the end, right? It's because the ultra processed foods causes you to eat more calories. Like, that's part of it. That is certainly part of it. But it's not the whole thing. It's also the insulin spikes. It's also the addictive potential of, say, Cheetos versus eggplant, right? It's like there's nothing equal about those two foods. Like, you eat a package of Cheetos or you eat a bunch of spinach, there's nothing equivalent about them. And it's not the vitamins, right? You could stick a bunch of multivitamin. I could take a multivitamin with a handful of Cheetos. It's still not the same as eating eggplant,
Mhm.
right? And yet somehow they've convinced everybody that it's the same thing. They're the same number of calories. Therefore, it's equally fattening. No, the Cheetos are fattening. The spinach is not fattening, right? It's as simple as that. Different foods have different hormonal effects. They have different hedonic effects. They have different, social effects. And that means they're completely different, even if they're the same number of calories.
Is it complicated or we just overcomplicated it and or oversimplified it and that's how we messed it up?
I think it was partially they wanted to make everything sort of one factor.
Mm,
So they tried to make everything equate itself in the final factor, at the end, sort of like alcohol in, alcohol out, right? It's like,
yeah.
oh, the factor is alcohol. No, it could be depression. It could be addiction. It could be a social situation. It could be post traumatic stress disorder, right? So if you're drinking because you're addicted, it's very different than if you're drinking because you have alcohol, depression, right? Or post traumatic stress disorder, right? You need to treat the post traumatic stress disorder, or you need to treat the addiction. You don't need somebody to say, drink less alcohol, right? So, but because you try to focus in on a single factor, you wind up with the calories at the end of it, which is the only factor that sort of is at the common end of it. But you don't understand how it got to that point, right? So you just like, to get rich, you just need to make more money than you spend. Well, duh. Of course it's true.
Yeah.
But what are the factors that leads you to make more money than you spend, right? Is it education? Is it hard work? Is it where you're born? Is it about, getting out there into the, traveling and becoming worldly? Is it about writing a blog? It could be any or all of those things, right? But if you try to say, okay, well, what makes people rich? Then you say, well, it's money in minus money out, right? It's science. It's not science.
Thanks.
It's shallow thinking, but it's seductive. It's so seductive, right? And it's not by accident. And this is actually very interesting because there was a huge amount of money pumped in by the ultra processed food companies to create this sort of it's all calories narrative. Why? Because if you're selling sugary soda, which everybody knows is fattening, you want your sugary soda to be as fattening as that eggplant because they're both 500 calories, right? So there was a huge amount of money. In fact, there was this whole sham front called the Global Energy Balance Network, which tried to blame exercise, lack of exercise for obesity, right? And it was funded. They gave Coca-Cola gave $1 million to one of the University of Colorado or something like that. They had to eventually as exposed in the New York Times, and they had to give it back. And it was like, yeah, because sugary soda is not good for you, right? It's like that's obvious, but they spent a lot of money influencing doctors, influencing dietitians to tell everybody basically, hey, it's not the sugary soda, it's that you don't exercise. Again, blame the victim. It's a
Yeah.
very successful strategy.
I I would say, pick up this book if you have, tried all the diets or lost and gained back and wondered why, or want to lose weight truly in a way that you have a chance of being able to maintain and sustain. Definitely read this book if you're following along with one of my programs. But what would you say? Read this book if
If you want to understand really how weight gain happens, right? It's a book
Mm.
about science more than anything else. Out of that science comes all these sort of three golden rules and 50 tips. And honestly, the tips are funny. I think they're funny because they're almost exactly what your grandmother would have told you, right?
Yeah.
Like obviously, like don't snack all the time and don't eat so late and
Yep.
don't eat all this ultra processed foods, right? It's like the funniest thing because it's like all these advice is just like to her or him would have been like your grandfather would have been just common sense, right? It would just be like that's just the way we eat. Don't eat in your car. Duh.
Yeah.
Like if you're too busy, then don't eat, right? It's like, come on, this is so if you really want to understand sort of what drives eating behavior, then you need to read the book because honestly, I can't think of any other book that actually talks about what I talk about here in the Hunger Code. The Obesity Code was very similar in that there were a few people talking sort of around that issue, not very many, like 2% of the books were talking about that. But really, I haven't seen any books talking about this. But it's what's interesting to me is that also if you look at practitioners, like look at the people who are actually working directly with people trying to lose weight,
Yeah.
when they read the book, they're like, oh, this is all this. They knew all this.
Yeah.
It just wasn't put down, right? So it's like the food addictions and the ultra processed foods. They knew all this stuff. It's not like I'm telling them anything new or,
Yes.
have people to support you or get the good mindset. Anybody who actually works with people knows this stuff is true. But then the minute somebody goes to some scientific guy, they'll be like, count your calories and forget about mindset and forget about stress and forget about sleep.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to fail, then you forget about stress and forget about sleep because those are parts of eating behavior. But the people who actually work with people, like the people like sort of down in the trenches, they all know that this stuff is true. Like
Yes.
it's obvious.
Yeah. It is. I think it's the why, understanding why, having a deeper level of understanding as to why what you did before wasn't working, why all of it. That third why. You give us like
Yeah,
15 whys. You get right into it. It's such a fabulous book. Thank you for writing it. It's about time. The industry, the people in the diet industry, meaning the people doing all the diet, spend all their time and energy and money. That's who needs to read this book. That I think you are gonna validate so many people with this book. I think it's
thank
gonna
you.
be a game changer for the diet industry.
I
I could
hope
talk
so.
to you
I
forever.
hope it. I hope it just changes people's attitude, truthfully, because it's people talk about the calories, but it's really about this sort of set point, this sort of body fat thermostat, which is really controlled by the hormones, which gets back to eating behavior, which includes digestion, absorption, macronutrients, calories, to some extent, but it's not the overriding factor, right? If you want to understand all the other factors that go into it, then yeah, if you read the book, if you understand it, then you can do something about it, right? The first step is you have to understand what's your problem. And it's so simple. If your problem is that you're not sleeping and you're doing night shifts and you're gaining weight, then yeah, you could probably do something about it. Maybe you can change your job and not work night shifts. But then at least you know why, right? And it
Yes.
wasn't the calories, it was the ghrelin, it was the hunger that was driving you to the eat. And it was the stress that was driving your body to store all this, right?
Mm.
So the whole point is that if you understand that, then you can now make the choices. And maybe you don't quit, maybe you do quit, but you can make that choice now to say, this is my problem. It's not that I don't know how to count calories, it's that
Yeah.
that wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
The problem is the sleep. The problem is the stress. The problem is, not enough protein. The problem is, too many refined foods. The problem is there's so many problems. And I always say that the funny part is that to the person with the hammer, every problem is a nail. So that's the reason why people are all into calories because it's like, oh, you're gaining weight. It must be it must be the calories because that's the person with the hammer. But it could be so many other things. It could be like, stress, it could be sleep, it could be food addiction, it could be ultra processed foods, it could be, protein, it could be the way you're eating, how often you're eating, what you're eating. There's so many different things. It could be the habits, it could be your mindsets, all of those things, right? So it's not, every problem is a nail, which is eat less calories, right? Your problem
Yeah.
is sleep, eat less calories. Your problem is stress, eat less calories. Your
Yes.
problem is food addiction, eat less calories. Your problem is, ultra processed food, eat less calories, right? That's the man with the hammer, right? That's not going to work, right? You need to go in and say, no, the problem is that, ultra processed foods. Now deal with the ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
How you deal with it is, there's lots of different things, but at least you know.
People have to have an understanding of what's going on. Everyone always looks to the food when it's probably not the food. It's probably, all these other things. We didn't even touch on set point. We didn't even like, oh my goodness. I need a 5-hour conversation.
The set point is all in there. It's about the hormones because
Yeah.
those hormones move it up and it moves it down. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's,
Well, it's a good reason to have you back on because I always enjoy my conversations with you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
oh, thank you. I had a good time.